Gymru, a croeso I Brifysgol Gaerdydd. So, good evening everyone, welcome to Cardiff, welcome to Wales if this is your first time. The sun always shines in Cardiff, so those of you who don't realise, come back. So it's a real pleasure to be hosting this evening here at Cardiff. Colleagues of mine I know have been connected with Skellern and with mental health nurse and academics for a long time. Ben and Linda are here. I'm sure you'll get a chance to catch up with them later. So it's a real pleasure. It's also, I'm particularly touched actually to be invited to chair tonight because Anna Ibusi and I worked together many, many years ago, 92-ish or something like that. And so it's a real treat to see Anne again. And I can't see Kevin Gorney here yet, but, oh, hello. So, and Professor Gorney, I met at my first conference and you chaired my first presentation, so thank you for that. That was great. First, housekeeping. Most of you will have called into the rooms upstairs, the committee rooms upstairs, which is where we're going to be having refreshments, buffet and wine at 8. So that's upstairs. There's toilets just outside here on the left in the corridor. Should there be a fire alarm, it's not a test, we are required to evacuate, so there's an exit there. I feel like we're a hostess now, so exits both sides. If anyone should need a lift to go up and down the stairs, there is a lift just out there on the left-hand side. So Cardiff has a strong history and strong connection with mental health nursing. We originally started with an integrated general and mental health degree programme. Ben will remind me how many years ago, a long time ago, but we've rolled with the changes and as everyone else has, and we still provide an undergrad programme with about 200 undergrad students currently doing well. We also have a good doctoral programme with some fantastic recent completions. Colleagues in the room, Gavin John has just completed doing an inpatient CAMS project about keeping in touch. So he finished earlier this year. Alicia, also in the room, looked at the experiences of mothers of adults with schizophrenia. And I'm not sure, Fortune might be with us on a live stream, but she's not in the room. And she did something on recovery practices in adult mental health services. So some great completions this year. And we have a great research portfolio, I guess, looking at children, adults and older people's mental health services. So the way that their services are organised and designed. And that's our sort of trajectory. We're really proud of our colleagues in the team. Our mental health team is full of people from various specialties, from the military, from children's mental health, from older people, from community. And lots of us try and stay connected to clinical practice in one way or another. So some people still see clients, still do family work, do consultancy, or do projects with the local community, such as awareness development in one of the local parts of Cardiff, actually, Grangetown. So we try and keep connected, so that's a great, I suppose, characteristic of our team. And just a little something before we move on to our speakers. For those of you who've not been to Cardiff before, I'd invite you to not walk very far, actually. Once you go outside the building, it's probably a 5 to 10 minute walk, and you get close to the Millennium Stadium. For those of you who are interested in rugby and or concerts, Cardiff Castle's out there. For those of you like Gavin and Stacey, that was filmed 5 miles that way. And there's often kind of celebrities, the A-listers and the Z-listers, kind of we bump into them in the street around here, so that's good too. So I suppose one of the joys of hosting the Skellern Lecture is, as an institution, we get the opportunity to determine a special award. And our special award, we are inviting Trudi Peterson, she's going to come and talk to us now. And Trudi Peterson is someone who celebrates mental health nursing. She's a mental health nurse, but she's also a performance poet. So thank you, Trudi.
Lovely. Okay. Thank you very much. Just press the right buttons. That would help, wouldn't it? Okay. Let's go up a little bit with that. I don't normally do this, standing behind a lectern. I'm normally in a pub somewhere full of drunk people who are heckling. Feel free. Also, most of my poems are quite rude and quite funny, but I changed my mind for this one, so this is serious. I was asked to do a poem for this event, and it started off, I was trying to think about, you know, when somebody says to you, oh, you're a mental health nurse, what do you do? And it's really hard sometimes to just encapsulate it, isn't it? Because we do lots of things. So I wanted to do a poem about what I thought being a mental health nurse was and who we are. But it actually morphed, as I was doing it, it morphed into as much about the people that we care for as well, and the people that we have cared for, because I think we kind of get interconnected. So it's called We Are the Locksmiths. Can you hear me okay? Am I too far away? Yeah, okay. Oh, you're quiet. You're not like a room full of drunks. Okay, we are the locksmiths. Who are we? We are the locksmiths, filing blanks. A millimetre shaved off here, an extra notch cut there. From description, from memory, seeking perfect facsimiles for lost keys, to hearts and to minds. Trying to find that perfect fit, waiting for that satisfying click that opens or seals. Our hands have calluses wrought with the trying of turning. We are the listeners of language, observers of symbols, looking for patterns, making meaning from shapes, voicing the voiceless, often lost in translation to medical jargon. Some things can only be heard, they cannot be explained. We are the sin-eaters, absorbing, absolving. Thoughts sometimes dangerous and bleak, drawn out from crevices deep. We soak them up, eat, until they are part of our being. Look closely. You can see them in the flecks of our irises, in steamed breaths on early morning shift chill air. Listen, you can hear them there, in the rhythm of our hearts, the pulse of our veins. We remember their stories, their faces, their names. We are the carriers of weights, filling our pockets with pebbles and rocks, beachcomber finds, decorating office desks neatly placed in line. Some we hold a while, palm stones, worn by time. In amongst them, gemstones, rare. We wear them on our breast, encased in gold, precious opals, rubies, fiery red. Memento mori of long careers. Harder than a diamond, heavier than lead. And what do? Well, we hold it together when systems are breaking. We stand firm when foundations are shaking. We are the believers, faith leapers, gatekeepers. We are the torchbearers. We are the hope seekers. We are the thinkers, the leaders, the wise ones, the old hands, the safe hands, the neophyte young ones. Birthed from the workhouse and the asylum. Look at us now, how far we have come. This profession is hard won. And what of our future? What will we become? In 100 years, who'll stand here and say with pride, I'm a mental health nurse? Colleagues, you are where the future lies. What will we become? What will you decide? Diolch yn fawr. I actually forgot to say something. That was dedicated, completely forgot dedication. That was dedicated to, is there anybody from Oxford here? No? Oh, excellent. Somebody I can pick on. Wonderful. That was dedicated to a gentleman called Tom Christian. No, it's okay. Don't worry. Nobody else knew either. Tom Christian, 99 years ago, was the first UK mental health nurse to go on the register. 100 years next year. Oxford, I'm available. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trudi. Trudi, I'm going to ask you to come back up. So, could I ask Alicia Stringfellow, so professional head of nursing, mental health nursing at Cardiff, whether you would present the plaque to Trudi, please?
Oh my goodness. You are Trudi. Can you be photograph taken as well? I'll give it out.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on now, and I'm going to invite Steve Clarke. Steve works for Welsh Assembly Government and is the mental health nursing officer attached to the Chief Nursing Officer team. Is that right? Right. So welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Wow, Trudi, diolch o galon. Cerdd hyfryd, cerdd cofiadwy. Amazing, beautiful poem. Thank you so much. So, Steve Clarke dwi'n swyddog nyrsio iechyd meddwl gyda Lliw Cymru dros nesa. So I'm a mental health nursing officer with Welsh Government, and I work just next door in that horrible bunker you can just see across the way. Croeso eto I Cardiff I Cymru as well. So add my welcome to you to Wales and to and Cardiff, and croeso mawr I bob line as well. So welcome to people who are tuning in online. Firstly, an apology. I'm clearly not Sue Tranka, the Chief Nursing Officer for Wales. Sue really wanted to be here tonight, but sadly she is unwell. So you have me as a stand-in. Sue was really delighted to be asked to come and speak this evening, and was really looking forward to hearing about Anne's work on racial trauma, particularly in a mental health context. But was also really looking forward to celebrating Mary's career as well, and how amazing it is to be here tonight, to be with you, to celebrate those two women and their amazing careers that they've had, and the huge contributions they've made to mental health nursing. So it is really a huge honour to be here. So I thought I'd say a couple of things really. The first is just to say something about the role of the CNO here in Wales, which is a little bit different. And then to talk to you a little bit about the priorities that we have up till 2024 and some of the other things that are going on in Welsh Government as well. But it'll literally take about 4 minutes, so I'm not gonna labour the point. CNO in Wales is a unique role with many different hats. But there's three key things that Sue does and does exceptionally well. The first, obviously, she's the head of the nursing midwifery professions here in Wales, and Sue, interestingly, is many qualified as a midwife, a mental health nurse, a community nurse, and adult nurse. So she not only has that adult nursing brief, but has trained in many different areas as well. So she's head of all those professions here in Wales, and is the voice of nursing at the centre of government here. And she's chief advisor to Welsh Government, so directly to ministers and the First Minister here on all things nursing, quality and safety. And then probably just as importantly as the other two roles, she's also the executive director of NHS Wales as well, so the nurse director in that part of the system too. So it's a huge job. And Sue does an amazing job. I'm not just saying that because she's my boss, but anybody that knows Sue knows just what a truly transformational person she is and has been for Wales since she's arrived. She's an amazing super connector and just an absolute force of nature. So, I'm very privileged again to work for her. In terms of the priorities, there's 5 key things, and I'm not going to again labour the point on these, but you can, if you type in CNO Wales priorities into any reliable search engine, you will find the web pages on that. But broadly, it's about leading the professions, improving the workforce, making nursing and midwifery attractive, improving outcomes, and then something about professional equity and healthcare equality as well. And I won't say very much about those things, just some highlights in terms of what we do on those particular priorities. But there's a particular thing here in Wales. Since devolution, Wales has started to kind of get confidence politically and has started to do some really interesting things politically and legislatively. So here we have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which tends to steer a lot of decision making that we have at a government level and a lot of the legislation that passes through the Senate. But that basically asks us and indeed tells us to think about the future generations when we're making decisions in public service here. So we're constantly thinking about not just the here and now, but actually the future and the future and the future beyond that. And that's such an important thing here because it makes sure that we're kind of grounded in sustainability and many other things as we make decisions. In the context of the CNO office, then there's something particularly lovely, which is the harnessing of the previous generations of the executive directors of nursing. So all of the EDONs that retire aren't allowed to retire, basically. They are put back in the harness and brought back into service as mentors and coaches for the next generation. And a great example of that is the lovely Claire Bevan, who was the Executive Director of Nursing in the Ambulance Service, who's now mentoring a whole group of nurse digital scholars, 3 of which are mental health nurses, through their Florence Nightingale Foundation programme for this year. But there's lots of things like that happening on that generational basis. So we have a mental health strategic workforce plan here in Wales, and that is now in the delivery stages and has seen some really interesting actions in terms of increasing mental health nursing placements at HEIs. The task now is to really focus on improving the fill rate for those places and retention of those students in those programmes. And that's something that we're consistently focused on with our partners in Healthcare Education and Improvement Wales. And then in terms of healthcare outcomes, we're focused on developing a quality and safety dashboard for mental health, some really interesting work on mental health outcome measures, and finally a mental health patient safety programme, which is just about to kick off as well. And then the last thing I'll probably just say about all the work that's going on, we're in a strategy cycle here now in Wales as well, so we're just about to really go into high gear on that work, with the idea of having a new mental health strategy for Wales and a new self-harm and suicide strategy by the end of this year. So huge amounts going on in the mental health space with a relatively small resource. But what's striking is the kind of dedication and the commitment from policy team and from everybody across the system to do well with that. So there's a lot going on in the CNO office, and we're an ambitious and sometimes impatient bunch. That's because we know mental health and mental health services aren't where they need to be and should be in Wales, and we're not doing what we really can do for the population of Wales. And we have immense challenges ahead of us, not just in delivering what I've just said, but in terms of meeting the mental health needs of a population that's really poorer and sicker than probably the majority of the rest of the UK. So with those immense challenges, we have to also hold in our heads what somebody like Don Berwick says, I guess. You know, Don Berwick, for those of you who don't know, is the President Emeritus of the Institute for Healthcare Improvements. It's kind of like the guru. He's the daddy of anything to do with improvement in healthcare. And Don Berwick is also a Bevan Commissioner here in Wales, so he works with the Bevan Commission on improvement in Wales. And he says something really interesting about Wales, the fact that Wales is the right size to get a really interesting shift in terms of how a health economy works and how it improves itself. So it's not too big, it's not too small. It's that kind of Goldilocks zone for healthcare improvement. It's got a really communitarian, cohesive culture here. And he's been here a few times and has always said that's kind of quite an important thing when you're trying to communicate with people about healthcare and change, that you have that cohesion and that community commitment behind you. And the last thing he says, there's a lot of political will and the right plan behind it. So, you know, our ministers are squarely and right behind us all the way in terms of helping us make change. So all the right things are in place. It's just how we kind of harness all of that and do the right things in the right sort of way. So it's daunting sometimes, but mostly exciting working for Welsh Government and the Office of the CNO. And it's a great place to work in terms of forward-thinking people who are energised and committed to doing things differently. So join us, those of you who don't work here already. So I'll stop there and say diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's really heartening actually to hear about the way things are moving forward quickly with the new strategies in hoping to come online this year. And of course, it's a real dilemma for all of us across the country, isn't it, about recruiting students and recruiting enough good quality students and then translating that into the workforce, into a workforce that's properly supported. And so thank you for that, Steve. I'd like now to invite Dr. Gary Winship to join me here, Associate Professor at the University of Nottingham, and he's going to offer an introduction to the Skellern lecture. But we're also very lucky this evening to be joined by Eileen Skellern's nephew, Paul Forte, who has also agreed to pop up and say a few words.
Thank you for that introduction, Nicola. And with Trudi and with Steve being the A-listers, I must be the Z-lister, I think, in the list. Just to say a couple of words. You may or may not see a family resemblance, I'm not sure. But welcome to the Anti-Eileen lecture, as I like to call it. I've been to 2 or 3 of these over the years, and it's a great privilege to be here, and thank you very much indeed. And also for keeping the whole thing going, I think, which is it's a wonderful tribute to Eileen. And all the work that she did and setting the scene and things like that. I'm not involved in mental health services myself, although my entire career has been in planning and managing health services and lecturing in that area as well. So I like to think there's some sort of connection. And most recently I was doing work in Abertawe, Bro Morganwy as it was then, and in Cwmtaf as well. And one other last thing just to say is that the painting itself, that was painted by my mother, my mother's second husband, Bob Beattie. So there's a family connection even still going there. And Eileen's 2 sisters, Margaret and my mother, Elizabeth, they made careers in nursing themselves all the way through. So it's lovely to see you all here, and please carry on the great work.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Nicola. Dr. Anne Ayabusi is a registered mental health nurse, forensic psychotherapist and group analyst, and worked full-time in NHS forensic services for 30 years, and this included consultant nurse roles in the women's services of 2 high-secure hospitals. Early in her career, she was the clinical nurse manager at the Caswell Clinic in Bridgend and was amongst the team who set up the first purpose-built forensic unit in Wales. She completed a PhD at Middlesex University with psychoanalytic support from the Tavistock Clinic, and her thesis focused on therapeutic relationships with people diagnosed with personality disorder, and is currently Principal Director, Consultant Nurse and Psychotherapist at the Psychological Approaches CIC, where the focus of her work is providing training and consultancy to staff groups in forensic offender care and complex needs services. And also sits on the Board of Trustees at the Institute of Group Analysis and is the member for Anti-Discrimination and Intersectionality. She is also a board member and joint chair of the Training Committee for the Forensic Psychotherapy Society. It's impressive enough, but alongside all of these contributions Anne has made to clinical teaching and practice, strategic developments in our field, she's also published numerous papers, chapters and books. And her lecture this evening, which is going to be thought-provoking, is a topic of a book she is completing about forensic psychotherapy and racial trauma. She is a seasoned speaker at conferences, both in the UK and abroad, and delivered the 11th Maxwell Jones Memorial Lecture at the Royal Society of Medicine. She is enormously esteemed, and I might add, loved by colleagues. Gwen Adshead heard that Anne was delivering the Skellern lecture and told me, Anne, quote, is a great teacher from whom I have learned so much. I think she was one of the very first people I met who really understood the plight of the patients in high secure hospitals. And when I have a tough job to do thinking about complex organisations, I ask for Anne, and she never fails me. What a great colleague and teacher. End of quote. And likewise, our mental health nursing colleague, Chris Scanlon, sent this message. Anne is intelligent, conscientious, tireless, with a huge capacity to think about what many find unthinkable, to bear what many find unbearable, and to love those that many find unlovable, and to do so with dignity and with kindness. A wonderful colleague, a great friend with whom I stand in solidarity. End of quote. Jen French, from the moment I met her at the Caswell Clinic, Anne is my hero, and because of her, I've succeeded. I can't thank her enough, and I love her. Anne Jackson says she's a beautiful speaker. Where's Anne? So no pressure there. I've known Anne probably for more than 25 years now. I recall, and I don't know if you recall, we first met when we were competitively shortlisted for a consultant nurse post at Broadmoor. And we had a day of activities with all of the candidates spending time together. It was a group interview of sorts in the sort of tradition of those sorts of activities. Anne won and was appointed, and quite rightly so. I saw then that Anne was commanding and gentle in requisite measures, resourceful and incisive, and altogether beautifully compelling force of mental health nursing nature. I am delighted and honoured to introduce you this evening, Anne, as the 2023 Skellern Memorial Lecture.
Just test this. Can you hear me? Good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gary. That was overwhelming, actually, in the best possible way. It was lovely. Thank you. And to all the people who also contributed to that introduction. So I am very pleased. I am nervous, actually. I'm not usually a nervous speaker, so there's something about this particular opportunity really that means a lot to me. It means a lot to me as a nurse to have had the honour of being invited to deliver this Eileen Skellern lecture for this year. It means a lot to me to be in Wales. As you heard, I did work here, only for a couple of years of my quite long career as a mental health nurse. But as I have said many times in my when I've spoken about my career and the journey, I tend to say at the Caswell Clinic, I went to the mountaintop and I saw the promised land in terms of what forensic nurses, which I think that's what I am in my heart and will be for all of my days, really. And I saw what forensic nursing can do and the difference that forensic nursing can make to people in a particular predicament who, as Christopher Scanlon said in his message, are not the most lovable people. And of course, as forensic nurses, we find care and we find compassion, and we tend to have to usually go the extra mile to support people in unbearable positions, really, to salvage something of a life. And we do that for the people, but we do it also in the service of public safety, and that also has to be remembered. So the other thing is, the other reason being here means a lot to me is because I have Welsh heritage. My mother was Welsh from North Wales. And we lost the last member of my mother's side of the family 2 years ago today, actually, against the backdrop of COVID. So I feel it feels important to me. It feels that my Welsh family would have been very proud. So all of that being said, I will begin this lecture on this subject that isn't an easy, it's not an easy subject to talk about at the best of times, I must say. At a time when the country really is shocked and mourning following the horrendous murders in Nottingham this week as well. It makes it all the more difficult, really, but I shall proceed. So this issue about racial trauma, it feels as though racial trauma is a term that has only really recently found its way into our sort of everyday parlance, if you like, more or less into the mainstream, I would say, now. Thank you. After the Skellern lecture last year, which Gary delivered, I think the person who may have closed the event said something about if somebody looked at where we are now, many years from now, they wouldn't look too kindly on, this is how I remember it, on the position with regard to people from minority ethnic groups, black and minority ethnic groups, with regard to mental health. So when I had an opportunity to speak here, I felt, well, maybe it would be a good thing to try and pick that issue up and have a look at it in some depth. I say some depth, I mean going behind this list that has been around for maybe 60 years that I know of, with regard to the disproportionality that we find in mental health with regard to black people in particular, but also people from other minority ethnic groups. So disproportionately criminalised, detained, subject to restraint and use of force, disproportionately killed or dying during restraint whilst mentally distressed, importantly, with high, disproportionately diagnosed with psychosis, including schizophrenia, and so on, and so on. So this list has, becomes the issue to my mind, and I thought, let's see if we can go behind that list a little bit, and maybe understand why we keep on referring to it and not going much further. So, saying that, I am going to look at a few numbers. I don't want to fall into the trap, which is very easy to do, which is to just look at numbers for the period of time that I'm here. But I'm going to look at a few numbers just to set the scene, really. So this is, these are recent 2021-22 figures with regard to ethnicity and imprisonment in adult prisons. So as you can see, I've highlighted there, black people make up 4% of the population. And usually we're talking about people who identify as black British, black Caribbean, black African, but make up 13% of the prison population. So that's more than 3 times the proportion of the population. When it comes to young offenders, it's even worse. So, although the definition is slightly different, in that the definition used is black and minority ethnic as opposed to just black, but nevertheless, 56% of children in young offenders institutions and secure training centres are from black and minority ethnic groups. And in London, when you look at London in a male young offenders institution, we find 71% of the population there black and minority ethnic. With regard to the Mental Health Act, 5 black groups, so again we're talking about largely black British, black Caribbean, black African, make up 5 times more, are 5 times more likely to be detained under a section than are white groups, and that's compared to percentage in the population. So, one of the things that might feature in this picture might be racial trauma, which, as I say, is a relatively new, I think, to our sort of UK mental health context. I think it's a kind of new sort of narrative that's emerged. So when we talk about racial trauma then, we're really talking about a number of things. We're not talking about any one thing. So we're not talking about an incident or a particular presentation. We're talking about a number of things. So here's a definition by Williams and colleagues that I think kind of captures it more or less. It can be defined as the cumulative re-traumatizing impact of racism on a racialized individual, and it can include individual acts of racial discrimination combined with systemic racism, and typically includes historical, cultural and community trauma as well. So it's many faceted, really. And importantly, the thing with racial trauma is it doesn't stop, and that's an important thing. It goes on through the life cycle repeatedly, and in many ways it's this cumulative effect. So one issue in itself might not be too bothersome or might not create significant distress, but it's the ongoing nature of it that's really makes it so problematic, really. So breaking that down a little more then, we can think about here and now racialized events. So that might be racial abuse. And there is actually a particular construct that's been developed by some very, very persistent researchers, Carter and Peters, in the USA, where they have defined, I would think about it as a kind of condition, or, which they call race-based traumatic stress, which requires the an act of abuse, say, or an incident that targets something about a person's race, so colour, hair, something like that. That has to be emotionally painful, has to occur suddenly, kind of in a way that the person has no control over. And it needs to lead to symptoms very similar to post-traumatic stress disorder, repetition, intrusion, numbing, that kind of thing. So it could be that a racialized event might be severe enough to create that kind of distress. But it might be the common or garden getting your name wrong or laughing at your name, for example, or people pulling their shopping bags closer when a black person walks past or locks the car door, that kind of thing. And the cumulative effect of those microaggressions, as they're called, can be very, very problematic for people in terms of health. So some researchers, Geronimus in the 1990s and Professor David Williams, who I notice is part of the UK Race Observatory as well now, which is good to hear. But they researched the impact of racism from the perspective of life expectancy and looking at why people from minority ethnic groups have a reduced life expectancy, with black people having the most, the greatest impact in that respect. And found that when every other variable is taken account of, the one that makes the difference is racism and the stress of living with racism that literally wears down the nervous system. And they have this term for it, racial weathering. So that's one dimension, if you like, of racial trauma. Another dimension is the transgenerational aspect, whereby people who spend their time studying and working with large groups, so societies, countries, nations in conflict, that kind of work, would see the racism that's around today as the consequence of undigested, unprocessed, transgenerational racial trauma. And it could be argued that that becomes most visible in the criminal justice system and within secure mental health services. And this is a term that we use in group analysis, the location of disturbance. So this is an issue that's relevant to all of us. But the disturbance, if you like, the disturbance, the distress, the trauma sequelae, however you wish to frame it, becomes most clearly visible in a particular place. So just in the same way as a family might have an issue, a trauma or a distress, but it gets located in one individual who becomes ill. So in the same way, systems within society can operate like that. And so I'm suggesting, as many people have before me, that this undigested racial trauma that has been passed from generation to generation to generation is most evident around criminality, I guess. And we can think about that as a location of disturbance. Intergenerational trauma. When we talk about intergenerational trauma, we're usually talking about trauma that's been passed on within families, from one generation to another within a family. Transgenerational trauma, we're usually talking about large group traumas. So the intergenerational element, community or in-group trauma, so trauma that's affected a particular group or community. And of course also internalized racism, where people of colour and black people share kind of racist values that are turned on the self. So many faceted. Another thing from group analysis that I want to mention is the social unconscious. And the reason it feels important to mention this is because psychological theories, for the main part, are focused on the individual. What's wrong with the individual and their internal world, and haven't focused so much or taken account of, or in some cases it seems deliberately avoided, considering that we carry, which relates to the social world. So the idea that our unconscious has a social aspect to it, and is infused with the social and political. And so what happens in society also comes into, well, it comes into our minds and it comes into our relationships. It comes into our institutions, it comes into our groups. That it carries our generational history of racialized or ethnic trauma. And I think there are few people who can go back very many generations before they find quite significant ethnic or racial trauma. And we carry that in our, at an unconscious level within our minds. That's the theory. And the point of it is that those historical traumas can be reactivated in the here and now, and they can be reactivated at group level and at large group level. So hence we can see, for example, around the world, conflicts that are taking place now that have their roots generations back, but they get activated by a here and now event, usually related to the leader. Also, the social unconscious operates in this systemic way where it likes to identify a location of disturbance. And we can see that in our smaller groups, can't we? In the exemplar would be the scapegoat, I suppose, wouldn't it? Somebody who carries the burden of the wider group, issues of the wider group. Experience around the social unconscious and even narrative that speaks to it is frequently visceral, is very painful, very difficult, involves the vagus nerve, which runs, as you'll know, down the front of our bodies and holds trauma, and regressive in the sense of it's very easy to end up in a split, in very polarized positions. And that happens a lot around race and racism. It seems to fuel very, very strong emotional reactions, and often very strong reactions to silence and put a stop to thinking or discussion about it. And also, the tendency to organise into splits. So you have an organisation that responds to deaths of black people that's called Black Lives Matter. And for many people, there's a guttural response to say all lives matter, whilst completely missing the subtleties, really. My presentations always have a James Baldwin quote, or most often than not. So here's one where he's talking about how the past is also the present, really. The great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us and are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways. And history is literally present in all that we do. And that's often regarded as quite a good description, really, of the social unconscious. So thinking about what does this mean then to people, how does this phenomena influence the disproportionality that we see in criminal justice and forensic settings, and how does this location of disturbance come about? So I've tried to look a little bit, because this is a vast subject, and I'm trying to get it into a relatively short time slot. So here's a flavour of a kind of developmental pathway. Bearing in mind intergenerational and transgenerational phenomena that the child might also have. So here's there's quite a famous test, if you like, called the doll test, that was developed by Mamie and Kenneth Clarke in the 1940s, whereby children are asked really about which race they prefer. So the typical sequence is that a black child is asked is confronted, if you like, with a number of dolls of different races, different colours, really, meant to represent the different races. So they ask the black child, which is the good doll? And they point to the white doll. Which is the bad doll? And they point to the black doll. This is the typical sequence. So which is the pretty doll? And they point to the white doll. Which is the ugly doll? And they point to the black doll. Which is the... anyway, they end up saying, which one's like you? And then they point to the black doll and then usually crumple, sort of in distress. So the idea being that by preschool age, really, black children have internalised the idea that they're, inferior, really, in different ways, including that they're bad, particularly when compared to their white counterparts. So if we wonder why that might happen, we can refer to a study that was done, it's from Yale, Gilliam and colleagues. And they conducted an experiment. They asked preschool teachers and student teachers to observe challenging behaviour in classrooms. Now, there was no challenging behaviour going on, but the teachers, regardless of their race, started to track black pupils, particularly boys. So that's, maybe helps explain one of the ways in which these children end up internalising that they are bad at such a young age. Another term that's come into our vocabulary fairly recently is adultification. And adultification has been described as a form of dehumanisation, robbing black children of their innocence. Goff and colleagues conducted a very, very thorough, very impressive, I have to say, series of studies exploring this and the implications of it. And they found that, by and large, black boys are not afforded the privilege of innocence compared to their white peers. They're literally seen as older, usually by about 4.5 years. From the age of 10, they're seen as being about 4.5 years older, which means that a 13-year-old is seen as an adult by members of the public, but also by law enforcement agencies. And so they're seen as older, they're seen as guilty, and also that use of force, including punishment and violence against them, is justified. So this is very, very serious, because the thing with innocence is this is a period of human development when people are given leeway, when people are allowed to make mistakes, allowed to get things wrong, because the idea is there's time for them to learn and there's time for them to grow. And by the time they become adults, then they can take responsibility and be accountable for their actions. But during childhood, there's flexibility, and research shows that isn't given to black boys in the same way as it is to white boys in this study by Goff. And disturbingly, what Goff found was, and his colleagues, was that it wasn't really bias, because we talk a lot about unconscious bias, don't we, these days as well. It wasn't bias or prejudice that predicted this differential with regard to age, or or that predicted use of force on children, but it was actually dehumanization. So they used a kind of implicit association type intervention, whereby the participants in the research were, it was possible to associate or establish their association to black boys with animals. But of course it wasn't any animal, it was a particular animal, and that animal was an ape. And other research has shown this in relation to black people as well. And just to say, just in case there's any doubt about the prevalence of which the association of black people and apes is present in our social unconscious, I've selected some images. So the woman in the blue top is called Rennie Hector, and she's a footballer she used to play anyway for Tottenham Hotspur. And she complained after a match that her opponents, the woman who was marking her, was making monkey chants. And she complained about it after the match, and then was subject to horrendous trolling. And the image of the black woman there having a scan was one of the images that was sent to her. And if you have a look on the screen of that scan, you can see it's a monkey. the inference being that the black woman's baby is actually a monkey. So we have our black footballers when they, well, at home and away actually, but in certain parts of Europe in particular, when they're subjected to, continuous monkey chanting. The picture with the Arsenal player, if you look in the left-hand corner, you'll see the banana skin, which is what gets thrown at our footballers. So I think there's something about soccer and soccer matches that operates as a bit of a location of disturbance anyway, which, for another day, I guess. But also the picture of the Obamas there, that was featured in a Belgian newspaper just before the Obamas visited the country. And of course, if you know anything about them, you'll know that they were often depicted as non-human primates, or spoken about as such. And then we have the infamous image that Danny Baker tweeted after Meghan Markle and Prince Harry had their first child as the royal baby leaves hospital. So just to make the point that this is highly prevalent, this association of black people and monkeys or apes. So we can turn to black girls then. So Epstein and colleagues from Georgetown Law, they replicated part of Gough's study, the part of it that looked at innocence, only instead of black boys, they were looking at innocence, the public's perception of innocence in relation to black girls. And what they found was that the public found that black girls need less nurturing, less protection, less support, less comfort, are more independent, know more about adult topics, including sex, adultification. And we can think, well, that's an American, piece of research, except we have this incident that came to the public consciousness last year, the incident concerning child Q in the UK. So if you're not aware of this, this is a girl of secondary school age, a black girl. Teachers believed they smelt cannabis on her and were concerned that she might be carrying drugs into the school. So they searched her, didn't find anything. The child cooperated. So they, in the absence of the school, the police liaison officer at the school, because of COVID, the liaison officer wasn't there. So they contacted them by phone and they said, call the police, the local police, which the teachers did at the school. The local police came in and strip searched in the school premises this child who was taken out of an exam to do so. The details of the search in which are provided in the report, in the safeguarding report, by child Q's mother describes the dehumanisation very clearly that child was exposed to. And what I find particularly chilling is that she was then just sent back into her exam with no care provided. And of course, this child is, by all accounts, extremely traumatised by this incident. She has her words included in the safeguarding report regarding how, this is the language of trauma, isn't it? Somewhere where she was supposed to feel safe and taken away by people who were supposed to protect her, stripped her, and whilst on a period, and on top of preparing for the most important exams of her life, she now has to struggle with trauma symptoms, basically. And her mother also has her words included in the report and makes the point very clearly about adultification. She was treated as an adult, she was searched as an adult. So, the Children's Commissioner, outraged by that incident, and following pleas from child Q to make sure no other child goes through this, requested through freedom of information details from all the police forces in England and Wales about strip searching children. And the Children's Commissioner says in her report that she really didn't think that this happened very often, but actually, within 2 years, it happened almost 3,000 times. As with child Q, lots of evidence of poor governance, where children were not afforded the safeguardings and protections, such as having an appropriate adult present or a parent being informed about what happened. That didn't happen to the extent that it should have done. The Children's Commissioner found that there was little consideration about the traumatic impact of this kind of intervention on children. The tendency was to forget that children were children, so there we have adultification. In terms of numbers, 95% of the people strip searched were boys, with black children 11 times more likely to be strip searched than were white children. So if you can see how these experiences would build up, what would it do to somebody inside to be, disproportionately exposed to these kinds of experiences, the question. Traumatic experiences, really. And the worst outcomes, really, are deaths under restraint. So this is details of a new report that's been produced by Inquest, which is a charity which focuses on deaths, by the state, really, or in relation to the state. So they've interrogated the statistics that the police forces hold regarding deaths of people, black people. I think they're all black men, actually, that they looked at and found that those words that are so familiar now, aren't they, from the killing of George Floyd, I can't breathe, that actually those have been the dying words of several black men in the UK who've died in the context of restraint. I think including and especially those with in mental health crises, because certainly I've looked at a lot of these incidents, a lot of these men's deaths as part of my book that I'm writing, and it does seem that this is particularly likely to occur when people are in mental health crises. And when people seem to really panic, which is unsurprising that people would panic. It seems as though the nervous system's got activated out of control, and the response has been more and more and more restraint. And of course, people have died through, usually because there've been so many bodies on them, really, or the position that they've been put in. But the thing is that black people are sick, according to Inquest, and these figures, of course, are contested, that the black people are 6.4 times more likely compared to their proportion of the population, and 7 times more likely than white people to die during or following police restraint, whether or not they're arrested or detained. So that's the difference, whether they're arrested or detained. Those are the, if you like, where the extra figures have been found by Inquest. The ones that get published include people who've been arrested or detained. But if you look at people where that hasn't happened, but they've still been restrained and died, then the figures climb up, according to Inquest. Now, this feels like an important study. So, following the murder of George Floyd, the Human Rights Council conducted a piece of inquiry, and they looked at 190 deaths of black people, unarmed black people, by law enforcement or in the context of law enforcement and all over the world. And they found that these incidents happen in countries that had former links to enslavement and colonization, and where people of African descent have settled. That's where they happen. That they regard as part of the ongoing dehumanization of people of African descent, and it's rooted in the false social construction of race, which I hope we all realise it is a false construction, really, but very, very socially powerful. And it was used to justify institutions of slavery and colonisation. So the Human Rights Council found that UN member states also, that with the links, if you like, to the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans and colonisations, also continue to deny or fail to acknowledge the existence of, I would say, the transgenerational racial trauma and systemic racism, basically. And that systemic racism and enduring harmful and degrading associations of blackness with criminality and delinquency shape interactions of people of African descent with law enforcement and the criminal justice system. So the issues of dehumanization to me and transgenerational trauma are very clear from that study. Crystal clear, actually, if you read it, it's crystal clear. That it makes me wonder why there's so much kind of difficulty recognising this in everyday life. It's very crystal clear. In the documents that concern the review of the Mental Health Act a few years ago, one of the things that struck me were the service user narratives, or the narratives of people from, in this context, they called it the BAME community. So that term was used until a couple of years ago, wasn't it, to refer to people of black, Asian or minority ethnic background, BAME. And so comments from people from the BAME community, including service users and carers, with regard to the experience of people from that community in mental health services, talk about the lack of cultural awareness of staff, the lack of BAME staff as therapists, so therefore the people don't feel understood and end up getting turned away from services. Their feeling is that the staff come with stereotypes, and this comment that was there more than once, for reasons I don't understand, but it says that they have to make a special effort to treat us like human beings. So I thought, well, isn't that also got more than a flavour of dehumanisation? So how the racial trauma, if you like, is permeating through the system. So it seems to me that race and racism can be regarded as a colossal and undigested global trauma that's transgenerationally transmitted. And it's not my intention, and it isn't my view, actually, that this is something that needs to be laid on to particular people. I think this is something that concerns us all, actually, and behooves us to think about it more, to take account of it when we think about the work we're doing with diverse communities, or any communities for that matter. I think particularly with regard to forensic and criminal justice work, it feels it should really be core to the thinking within those settings. And even in secondary care psychotherapy services, for example, thinking about those comments about the Mental Health Act, an observation of mine is that the high level of people from black and minority ethnic groups, particularly black, who don't complete courses of treatment, who start and drop out, who join groups, end up being the angry, you know, as the location of disturbance for anger. So therefore, that stereotype of the angry black man or the angry black woman, and end up leaving or just end up sitting for 2 years or however long the course of treatment is, enraged. And that our professional frameworks don't equip us with skills to work with that. That's one of the things that is very striking to me. So not just forensic services, actually. The stakes are higher perhaps in those settings, but actually this phenomenon is everywhere throughout our systems. It's easily reproduced, though, within institutions involved with people who have histories of trauma and offending. As I've said before, as the location of disturbance, it seems to be the location of disturbance. It usually means that you have a particular vulnerability or a particular inclination to attract what we might think of as projections of a certain type. So it would make a lot of sense that where you have people who are maybe not very well, who might be the people who have the least resilience, let's just say, against the kind of onslaught, against the weathering, who end up ill, who end up enacting in dangerous ways, and combined with people whose role it is, as well as to care, as well as to be compassionate, as well as to protect the public, but it's also to control. So where you get the combination together, it would make a lot of sense. And where criminalisation is a factor, it would make sense that that would become the location of disturbance for particular forms of racial trauma. One of the things I wanted to talk about tonight as well was that part of my work involves facilitating staff groups and teaching staff, who work in very intensive care services, forensic services for people diagnosed with personality disorder, women's forensic services, for example, so therefore the services that are most intense, where there's the most acting out, where the service user group are the most, in many ways, vulnerable, but who are most likely to be abusive to staff. That in those services that I've seen up and down England anyway, all over England, the large numbers of staff who work in those settings are black and suffer racial abuse sometimes from the minute they start their shift to the minute they go home. And how those people can withstand the extent of that racial abuse, I do not know. I do not know. And it can only be, I can only see it anyway, I can only conceptualize that as traumatic, really. To be called the N-word several times in a day is deeply painful for anybody. But this is what happens. This is the work that this group of people do. And to my knowledge, and Emma and I have spoken about this, there doesn't seem to be a professional position taken that I'm aware of around this. So I want to make that point, that in those services where maybe not many people go, there are groups of people who are subject to intense racial abuse, and therefore I would suggest trauma. It seems very clear that support, there's almost like two types of support are required. One type of support is required to understand this phenomena, I think, because often it isn't understood and it's kind of almost pushed to one side, I think. So there's a level of support required through education, I feel, as well. That's about understanding the dynamics of racism, that's about understanding racial trauma in all its permutations and the implications for the field of work that we're involved in. But there's also a requirement, to my mind, that's about healing for people who are exposed to, suffering from racial trauma as well. So I think there are two types of support, really, that are desperately needed in our services. And also, it feels that this needs to be understood from the perspective of transgenerational racial trauma. And in saying that, I kind of hope that reduces the sort of inclination to blame, and to lay sort of responsibility in a way that isn't helpful. As I say before, I think we're all involved in this. It's not a simple binary scenario. It's something that concerns us all. And that includes the difference between bias, because a lot of a lot of investment has been put into this issue of bias, and clarifying what our biases are and entertaining the biases. But in actual fact, when it comes to racial trauma, when it comes to the damage that is done from childhood onwards, actually the issue is dehumanisation. And you might have a bias against maybe promoting somebody from a particular background to a job, but you wouldn't want to see them dead, or you wouldn't want to see them hurt, and that's the difference, really, here. Or you wouldn't think they deserved, to be harmed, and that's what dehumanisation is about, really. So just to say something about priority actions. It seems important to incorporate details of transgenerational racial trauma and the systemic implications of that within our training programs. It seems important to support people to increase their awareness, particularly their ability to recognise distress as it's expressed by Black people. And in order to help service users and colleagues. Because that's, again, part of the issue, is that distress is experienced as anger or threatening, too often. So to understand how distress is expressed, and that might be thought about in terms of authentic allyship, how to support people who are exposed to this, intensely painful and traumatic phenomena on a daily basis. And I've said authentic allyship programs because in the same way as I think a lot of emphasis is put on bias, I think too much emphasis has been placed on allyship programs that are performative and not authentic, really. And then also, in response to the wounds and the need for healing, the importance of safe spaces for people to talk about their experiences, to have reflective groups for where people can be validated, really, regarding their experiences. I'm thinking about for staff here who work on the front line of these very difficult services, as well as thinking about clients as well who can also, of course, be on the receiving end of racial abuse in environments where they're supposed to be being looked after. And what that might do might just help with regard to resilience for navigating racial trauma, because it won't stop. It isn't going to go away. It isn't something that can be completely eliminated. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I think that's my time. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. When you opened, you said you were going to offer something challenging, thought-provoking. I was choked throughout, actually. So, thank you. Anne, wait a minute. So, I'm now going to ask Professor Danny Kelly, who's the RCN Chair of Nursing Research here at Cardiff University, if he would make a presentation to Anne.
So pleased to give this to you, Anne. What a fantastic lecture. Thank you so much.
Okay, everyone. So it's 7:15 now. I think it's time that we break for our buffet. I'm just checking with Ben. He's nodding yes. So where we'll be upstairs, where some of you would have had coffee, water, Welsh cakes or something in the committee room. So it's I'm just trying to orientate myself. Yes, it's upstairs. There are signs, and we meet back here about 8 o'clock. So see you then. I'm just going to invite Professor Kevin Gorney, who's the Emeritus Professor at King's College, UCL, to talk about the Lifetime Achievement Award. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I made two mistakes this evening. The first was bringing a jacket with me. The second one was trying to write an introductory address for Mary, and I tore up the third draft. I've had the great pleasure of talking to Mary in the last few days. Mary was one of my role models, because when I entered nurse therapy training in 1976, Mary had been one of a group who were the first clinical nurse specialists in mental health on a program that started in 1972. Mary's going to tell you about that. I've also had the benefit of some really lovely conversations with Mary, and she showed me all of her 87 slides, which I think the conundrum is how do you compress a lifetime into 45 minutes? Now, I've seen the latest iteration, and she's failed. She has failed, because her lifetime has been impressive. It's full of achievements, and actually she needs 50 minutes. So I'm going to close there and just invite Mary to give her address for this much-deserved Lifetime Achievement Award.
Well, everybody, it's really nice to see you and see so many faces from the past that we haven't seen in a long time, thanks to COVID. It's a real honour and a privilege for me to stand here this evening. And I want to thank Ben and all the team for all the organisation that they have done here. I would like to thank the people who nominated me and voted for me for this award. I'm really grateful. The Journal of Psychiatric and Mental Health Nursing has been in my life for quite a while, and I was in its life at the very beginning. So it's a real privilege to receive this award at this particular time. There's so many people that I would love to thank, but I don't have the time in my 80 slides. I will take a broad brush approach and say thanks to everybody. I've had the opportunity and the privilege to work with some amazing people. I have made some incredible friends. I have got some amazing memories, some of which I will share with you tonight, but I don't have time to go into all of them. Against the odds, I chose as the topic, as a lot of what I have achieved has in many ways been against the odds. So I thought what I would start off with is this slide, which kind of pulls together the various elements of my journey. And a lot of the things that I have done have been firsts, and Kevin has just referred to one of them. And I was the first in my family to do nursing, and that wasn't an easy route. I'll explain a bit about that in a minute. But other things like, and you'll see threads through what I say later, about collaboration, about therapeutic engagement, friendships, challenge, first time for everything. One thing leads to another, and so on. So there are certain threads that will go through, and I hope I can make it clear, and you will be able to identify those threads as I go through this. And it has been one long experiential learning journey with twos and fro's, and 2 steps forward and 1 back sometimes. But it's always been an interesting journey and a privilege. So on becoming a nurse, there were a number of influences in and around me, but probably the most important one was my neighbour Peter up the road. I grew up in rural Northern Ireland, and horses were always part of my life. And I was lucky enough that we had horses, but at home we always had to saddle up with a bridle and whatnot. But Peter's horses, I was able to go and catch them and ride bareback, much to my father's horror. But the thing about Peter was that he had a mental illness, and I didn't really know that at the time. But we kind of bonded in a way. He would disappear for a while, and then he would come back. But there was always that no one really knew, or nobody would talk about mental illness, certainly not in those parts of Northern Ireland where I lived. It was shameful to do that. So when I said that I wanted to be a nurse, my mother just couldn't take it at all. So that's in the days when we had no social media, so we were dependent on postman Pat and snail mail. So what my mum did was, and she did it with the best intentions, was she confiscated the letters that I was getting from the hospital that I had applied to. So she let me know about 4 days before it was my interview. And her phrase that she used to use quite regularly was, there's no point in doing this because you can only do a profession where you get a brass plate. So you get no brass plate if you're a nurse. Anyway, so against the odds, I went forward anyway. I ended up in Purdysburn Hospital outside Belfast, and that was a huge culture shock. I had no idea what to expect. It wasn't anything like I had anticipated. I had never seen so many elderly people. Of course, anyone over 30 was elderly to me in those days. But anyway, there were just so many people that looked disfigured, deformed, absolutely everything you could imagine. Because I went to a geriatric ward called Innisfree, and I met Sister Scott, and she was wearing this red dress, really, and these long white starched cuffs, collar, and this box hat. Quite a formidable person. I was petrified. But anyway, I got over that shock. And then something that I'll come back to later on was another patient, as we called them in those days. And she and I had a sort of a bond, but she would always call me Nana. And she'd say, Nana, have you a butt, Nana? Because she was always smoking. That was the other thing, a part of the culture shock. I couldn't understand that people were smoking on wards, not only patients, but also staff. I lived in the nurses' home, and there were rules. And the young people in this room will probably be horrified when you hear that I had to apply for a late pass if I wanted to go out. But there's always ways around late passes, as you know. So anyway, it did teach you discipline and responsibility and accountability, but also the nurses' home acted as quite a pool for catharsis. So we were able to come off shifts and talk about some of the experiences that we'd had. Anyway, at that particular time, Belfast was exciting, still is. And I used to get engaged in a lot of extracurricular activity. I was instrumental in setting up the RCN student nurse branch in the hospital at that time. I would run jumble sales and stuff like that. I would also do a lot of volunteering. I didn't call it that then, but that's what it was in hindsight. And I went to places in Belfast which I'm sure I should never have gone to. But there was no lone working policy in those days. So anyway, I finished my training, but then in Northern Ireland, I don't know what it was like in the rest of the UK, you couldn't register to be a nurse unless you were 21. So that gave me a certain amount of leverage to do other things. So then I became a state registered nurse. It was an SRN in those days. I went to Belfast City Hospital, another culture shock, change of pace, quite different, a lot of variety of experiences, each and every one I enjoyed. Each and every one had its strengths and its limitations. But when I was coming towards the end of my training, people got in touch with me, particularly the principal tutor. She said, no, you don't want to go back to mental health nursing, you're not suited for that. You're an emergency ward 10 nurse. So anyway, against the odds, I went back to Windsor House, which was a psych unit in Belfast City Hospital, and it's still there as far as I know. So when I did that, it was good, but it just wasn't enough. So I wanted more independence, I wanted autonomy, I wanted a challenge, I wanted excitement. So who doesn't want excitement when you're young? But I felt I had kind of exhausted my excitement in Belfast, so I needed to do other things. So I started applying for jobs in the places identified. There was a wonderful nursing officer at that unit who herself had a debilitating degenerative muscular condition. But I was going to her saying, I think I'll go here, I think I'll go there. I'm going to need a reference. And she said to me one day, nurse, just settle down and get on with it, would you? But then I started, in my enthusiasm for this challenge and excitement, I started working with Jim Quinn and Jerry Harbinson, psychiatrists and a psychologist doing behaviour therapy work. And this nursing officer came back to me, said she was terribly concerned about my welfare. I was staying too late and doing shifts, and I shouldn't be doing this and I shouldn't be doing that. But she was doing it for my welfare. She was really looking after me. And I learned a lot from her about being resilient and about determination, because she would pull herself up the stairs every day to the unit instead of taking the lift. And that's the kind of person that she was. She was absolutely marvellous, even though she and I often, saw the other side of the story. So then, to cut a very long story short, as a result of one of the interventions I had done with a patient, I was encouraged by the psychiatrist that I worked with at the time, who was a registrar, but under the supervision of Jim Quinn and Jerry Harbinson, to put in an abstract with this guy and go to a conference in Wexford. So I had to go back to the nursing officer and ask for funding to do that. And she said, right, well, 1 minute you're off to Zambia, next minute you're going to Canada, and now you want money from me to go for a conference. Just, I don't understand you, she said. You don't know what you want. But anyway, I'll give you the money. But she laid down conditions, which I didn't meet. Anyway, that particular conference in those days, and this just goes to show you the history and how long I've been attached to this stuff. That was called the British Association of Behavioural Engineering. Listen to the language. Then that became the British Association of Behaviour Therapy in 1972, led by Professor Isaac Marks. Then it became, in 1992, the British Association for Behavioural and Cognitive Psychotherapies. So you see the language and how the whole thing absolutely turned on its head. So at that particular conference, when I was explaining why I did what I did with this lady, I had no idea that the people in that audience was Marx and Gelder and Meyer and Bringelmann and all of those very famous people in those days in behaviour therapy. And I had no idea that the people that I was working with at Windsor House, I knew they were clinical academics at Queen's, but I had no idea that they were so influential in the field of behaviour therapy at that particular time. I was totally unaware that I was in the midst of making history. So then, when I finished my blurbing about what I did with this particular patient, Isaac Marks came after me and out to have a coffee and explained about the course that he was planning to set up at the Maudsley. And he said, you should apply. I said, no, I don't want to. That's London. I'm staying in Belfast because we're going to do the same thing here. Anyway, we didn't do the same thing there because the Nursing Council in Northern Ireland wouldn't approve it. So Isaac had said to me, look out for the application in the nursing press, which I did. I applied, and then we had this absolutely grueling process, which Kevin will be able to verify, where we were assessed every possible angle for 2 days. We were assessed as individuals and as a group. And that's when I first met Eileen Skellern. And Eileen Skellern became part of my life thereafter. So against the odds, I was accepted for that course, and it was a risk-taking. So the next thing I had to do was leave Belfast and go to the Bethlehem. So you see in the caption, the bottom of your screen, is my story from leaving Belfast to go to the Bethlehem. I got the RASC to do me a map. We didn't have a technology in those days, so you had to depend on the paper. Anyway, I got lost in Putney about, I don't know what time it was. I called the police. And I said, please, I'm lost. And the guy, I mean, they did answer the phone. The guy said, well, love, I'm so sorry. I think you need to just have a cup of tea and settle your nerves. So, which I did. Anyway, I eventually made it to the mausoleum. But that particular image is very telling, because that is now in the Bethlehem Museum of the Mind, my hologram. So, you know, I think it's right and fitting that I should be located in a museum. So, anyway, it's a great place to go, and anybody that ever has the opportunity, please go visit, because there's lots of wonderful artifacts there. Now, that's my little and lovely Ford Anglia car that took me all the way from Belfast to Bethlehem. So then there were 5 of us, and we were an experiment for 3 years. We were taught for 2. We were monitored and assessed for 3+. It was a research project funded by the Department of Health, which Isaac Marks led. And as Kevin said, we were the first generation of clinical nurse specialists, but we didn't know that. We were all doing something that we were really interested in. But we were based at 99 Denmark Hill, still there. And we lived at the Bethlehem Hospital, some of us on site and some off site. But we used to travel up and down in my Ford Anglia, 3 blokes in the back, and Moira and I in the front. We were all very different characters, came from very different backgrounds, very different parts of the UK. We got on most of the time. We were supportive of each other, but there was, and it's only now reflecting back on it, there was a current of competitiveness that existed. And we did a lot, and we did achieve a lot, and even though I say so myself. So it was, as I say there, a tapestry of and for learning. It was amazing. We had the best experience possible. We met leading experts like B.F. Skinner, like Jack Rackman, Falloon, and Martin Seligman. All these guys, and there were mainly guys in those days, gave us lectures or workshops or whatever. The one thing that really did terrify me was the one-way mirror experience, where we had to interact with the patient, set goals, and do all that under the scrutiny of peer group. And bearing in mind we were competitive now, the peer group and also our supervisors. All of the patients knew that we were trainees. That was made very clear to them. And each of them were very comfortable to have us as their therapists. So everything was video recorded, and yeah, it was a challenge. It was quite scary, but equally as scary was the ward rounds, when Isaac would get down on the floor, and if he were dealing with somebody who had OCD, he'd be modelling, touching the carpet and then licking his hands and all of that. And the other thing was the data. He was data mad. And he would get down on the floor, and he would, the graphs everywhere. We all had to keep graphs. Now remember, there was no technology in those days, so we were sitting punching things into a computer, not like today. And that was hard work, but equally as hard work was the scrutiny of our GP letters and how we were constantly corrected. And sometimes you didn't know if you were in English class or, you know, a behaviour therapy course. Anyway, you would have had the same experience, Kevin. So then they decided, remember we were an experiment, so they decided that we need to go on a secondment. So I went for 1 year to Springfield, and that was to see if we could function outside of the motherland. And I was supervised there by a clinical psychologist and psychiatrist. we had regular meetings back at the base, always testing to find out what new interventions we had done, how many hours we had spent with patients, how many sessions we had, when we were going to do follow-ups, what was the process of the follow-ups. It was constant bombardment, but it was good fun. But anyway, I didn't know then that 30 years later, I would come back to Springfield as the chief nurse and the professor of mental health nursing. And Springfield looks more or less the same now as it did then. So I remained at Denmark Hill, but as we had, I called it there a passing out parade, my challenging nursing officer came from Belfast with her physical disability to attend that event, which I thought was really quite remarkable. I didn't expect to see her there at all, but anyway. But the one thing I will say about that course, that it was and still is the most successful, effective qualifying course in mental health nursing. And if you look, and all of the people who've completed that course have all ended up in extremely influential leadership roles, either clinicians, managers, or researchers. So it's a credit to Isaac Marks for the work that he did, supported by Eileen Skellern, because he couldn't have done it himself without the support of Eileen. But we weren't universally accepted, and some professions didn't like us, and we were called cookbook therapists and all sorts. So that is my web of learning, the things that I got from doing that course, which eventually became a joint board 650 and then E&B 650. So there's probably some E&B 650ers in the audience. So those are some of the things that I learned, but there's also some consistencies in it about relationships and therapeutic engagement. But I did learn that, you know, there's a first time for everything, the value of data and measurement, which has stuck with me ever since. I learned and I developed a sense of self-confidence, which I didn't have before. And also I realized that I probably had a bit more ability than I thought I had. So there's a lot of things that went on. So then I had a change of direction. I got a nurse therapist course up north after I had left the Maudsley, or before I left, because I only went there for 7 months after I finished, because Peter Linley was on the tutors course and Peter was coming back then, so he was going to take over to be the tutor on the course. So Miss Skellern invited me to her office and she said to me, I have a job for you and you can do it. And that job was to set up a behaviour modification course for nurses working in learning disability, which I did. That caused me a lot of anxiety, a lot of new learning. I had the benefit of working in a highly functioning multidisciplinary team where parents were an active part of that team. But I had to learn that there were different goals and different expectations when working with people with learning disability, and I found that really, really hard work. But having worked with people who were experiencing anxiety and depression, to go to this other end was really quite difficult. But that course became Joint Board 700 and then E&B 705. And that too was highly successful against the odds, even though I started off with limited experience of working with people who had learning disability. So I stayed at the Bethlehem and I did all of those things. But throughout my time there, Miss Skellern, as I always referred to her, was always there beside me in a way. And even when she was very ill and when we had our first baby, she sent me a handwritten note. And I came across it when I was preparing the stuff for this presentation. And it ended off with, don't forget to let me know when you have a name. So that just says something about the person that Eileen was. So I went back to Northern Ireland because an opportunity arose. I went to the University of Ulster as a lecturer with a responsibility for the mental health nursing pathway. So I had to reacquaint myself with clinical areas that I had been before. I went back to Windsor House with Kadir Parahu, some of you may know, Kildare started the same time as I did at Ulster, and that was the first time I met Hugh McKenna. And Hugh McKenna has been in my life in one way or another ever since. So I wasn't sure how to begin to do this, set up this course for BSc nursing in mental health. So I decided I would ask patients, service users, what they thought would be a good thing to do to include. So I carried out a series of focus groups. I asked that question, and that's what they told me. Someone who listens, has time for me, accepts me. So that's what I tried to put into the curriculum. But they also taught me lots of lessons about, because I thought I was, quite clever. I was capturing all the things that they had told me in a language that was acceptable. They told me, no, you don't use that language. We don't want to hear that language. So I had to rework it. Taught me that I shouldn't assume anything about being on the same page with anybody, and that I needed to listen to what people were saying. So ever since then, I have involved service users in everything that I do. Now, I was doing this in 1986 when it wasn't really the thing to be involving mental health service users in education or research, but it just seemed to me to be the right thing to do. Then also as part of that course that I was involved with, the woman who led that course was a very influential person and very far-sighted when it came to nursing. She was quite idiosyncratic in the way that she went about her daily business, but she was quite a visionary. So she detailed Vivian Coates, now Prof Coates, and myself to do this module on microcomputing and nursing care planning. Well, I knew something about nursing care planning, but I knew nothing about microcomputing. So again, we had another challenge. So as you can see there, we went about our business and it worked out very well. We had publications from it, which even though they're quite elderly now, they're still there. And it led to the 3 points below. But in all of that mayhem, there was a senior lecturer at the university called Ollie McGilloway, and he's amazing. If you ever Google him, he was like Northern Ireland's equivalent of David Attenborough, because he used to do lots of wildlife programs and all sorts, as well as being a scientist in the proper sense of the word. But he used to say to me things like, girl, just chill out. Things are never tomorrow as they are today. And that's very true. So that opened up lots of new horizons, like the European Summer School Nursing Informatics. All came from those little presentations and publications that Viv and I did. And then we went on to do lots of things with that. We spent a lot of time in Wales, in Swansea, because they hosted the summer school more times than any other of the participating countries. At one time there was about 18, I think. I did most of the work in terms of organising it and the applications to the EU, because it was EU funded. And then it led to a lot of other influential things, and also the careers of some people who taught on that. In the early days, we were very dependent on expertise from the US, because they were more, or appeared to be more advanced in the use of technology in healthcare than we were. But we had our own experts. We had Paul Wainwright, we had Nick Hardiger, Derek Hoy, who unfortunately and sadly is no longer with us. So we had a lot, but it led to a lot of other things, including the RCN Nursing Informatics Group, where we worked with June Clarke, Sharon Levy, and Anne Casey, and a number of people there. So it was quite an influential thing from small beginnings. The largest thing that came from our small publications, so we never ignore starting small, was the Action Project, where we had 2 million euros, over 2 million euros, which was a lot of money in 1997 when we got the grant, but it took a lot of time to work it up. And we had a lot of partners. It was highly multi-professional, and it gave me opportunity because I was responsible for 2 units in that. Everything was driven by family carers. That's why it was so successful. And we had technology, and we had like a 4th TV channel. Now we're talking about 97, 98 here. We're not talking like, you know, a few years ago. So it was highly innovative, and it was ahead of its time. And carers absolutely loved it because we took on board the things that they said they needed. They wanted help with emergency intervention, so what to do when somebody fell down the stairs, if somebody choked on a tube, how could they manage that, because they were left to do that. And so I developed, with the help of software programmers and engineers, the emergency interventions and also the carers' coping capacity. So that allowed me to take my mental health nursing skills and my CBT skills into focus again. So that then went on to influence other interventions, and a lot of what we did then is now commonplace because people use video conferencing all the time and so on and so forth. Then that led to the Northern Ireland Centre for Health Informatics, which I also led. Again, it was a collaboration with trusts and higher education institutions and big pharma, and in many ways now it's we have got the Applied Research Collaboratives, which in many ways mirrors those initiatives that came from the UK Foresight programme. We had opportunity to work with lots of interesting people, and the most interesting one for me was Arnold Nicola, who was a real gem of a person, and I think that's why now wherein initially I might have been a bit apprehensive about meeting people like the Chief Medical Officer from NASA, it wouldn't have the same impact anymore, because Arnold was an ordinary person, and I think that's a lesson I've learned, that we're all ordinary people doing ordinary jobs, trying to do the best that we can for the people that we care for and work with. But mental health nursing always stayed alive in everything that I was doing. So we had the BSc for registered nurses, and within that then I started the BSc in CBT and psychosocial interventions. But a very important part of getting mental health nursing to be visible was the practice development and mental health programme that I did with 10 healthcare trusts in Northern Ireland, the Royal College of Nursing Institute in Belfast and Oxford, with Martin Ward and Jackson and Moira Davern. And that was absolutely brilliant. And for me, it was a real good example of how you can integrate research into practice with very good, clear programs, lots of mentorship and support. And that did change the perception of mental health nursing in Northern Ireland. It also changed the careers of some of the people who contribute to that. And Anne, you probably remember the lady who said that she was about to give up and take out her knitting, and as a result of this programme then she went on to the BSc in nursing. So just examples like that makes the whole thing worthwhile. So that's just some of the publications that we had as a result of that. But then I used that approach again when I went back to Springfield. So again, what's really important to me was all the time that this sort of chaos was going on and the toing and froing was Hildegard Peplau. And that's a snapshot of Hilda when she got her honorary doctorate at Ulster, and her when she was at nursing school in Pennsylvania. And then when I was applying for the job at Ulster, that's the note that Hilda sent me. She used to send me letters a mile long, in all handwritten like that. You know, I would send her something at Christmas maybe, I'll say, I'll write to you in the new year, and then she'd get back to me and say, which new year do you mean, Mary? I mean, she was brilliant. But then she said to me one day, this is one person you must meet, and that was Shirley Smoyak. So I did meet Shirley Smoyak, and we stayed friends until sadly Shirley passed away on the 1st of April last year. So that's when Shirley got an honorary doctorate at Kingston, and when she used to stay with us in Northern Ireland, she loved bottle feeding our orphan lambs. So she was a woman of many talents. So again, on my mission to increase the visibility of mental health nursing, I was part of the Journal of Psychiatric and Mental Health Nursing. So I was a member of the working group that was with Black Welsh Science to establish it. And Steve Tilley and I were the editors of Research and Brief for over 10 years. I wanted to try to make mental health, because this international conference at Ulster, as their 10th anniversary year, I was the ringleader in getting this conference going, but I wanted to have mental health nursing presence there because a lot of the people that were coming there were not mental health nurses. But Hilda was there, and Shirley was there, and Annie was there. But I thought this is a great opportunity to launch the Journal of Psychiatric and Mental Health Nursing, which is what we did. And we had 26 countries represented. And that's what happened. Hilda got her honorary doctorate. And then I got a personal chair in mental health nursing in 1989. And those are my colleagues. I was the chair of the nursing executive group then, and they told me that I was the first person in Ireland to get the personal chair in mental health nursing. So throughout all of this has been this therapeutic relationships and me wanting to learn a bit more and understand a bit more what happened. And it goes back to Nana, have you a butt, Nana? Because there was something about that person that connected with me. I don't know what it was, but we got on like a house on fire, wherein she didn't call many people Nana, and some other staff she just wasn't too keen on. So sometimes the situation could be different and difficult. But anyway, that got me thinking a lot about what happens with relationships. So then I decided I would do a PhD looking at how students learn the skills of psychiatric nursing and what's the contribution of the ward environment to that. And I said that within Bandura's work because I feel that his social cognitive learning theory is so relevant to what happens in clinical placements because it's about the interaction between the individual and the environment. It looks at things like self-efficacy, self-belief, reinforcement, role modelling, expectancy, all of those things that are so important to student learning and which often are not. The role modelling bit is really, that troubles me at the minute. I'll come to that later if I have time. So it was a marvellous experience, taught me a lot about SPSS and factor analysis, which nearly killed me. But anyway, it came to stand me in good stead later. So this is a bit of my experience. The first night I went to start my observation studies in a psychiatric hospital in Belfast, no, outside Belfast, in Omagh. I couldn't get in because I couldn't get to the keys, and I could see the keys through the window, but I couldn't get in to get the keys. Anyway, some nice gentleman came. My husband and our two babies were there at the time, alongside me, struggling, trying to get in. Then when I did get in, the bedside light bulb blew. Then the curtains fell down. Then the next day I had no hot water. And I called my husband and said, take me home. And he refused. So against the odds, I stayed. So then I felt the need to go back to London and move forward, or back to Oxford and move forward, because there was things I wanted to do. And anyway, I got a joint appointment after spending some time at the Research Institute in Oxford. That was a new job for me. I had no experience. I was never a senior manager in a trust, so I got that job against the odds. But it was brilliant because it gave me opportunity to work with nurses on the ground to introduce leadership roles. The RCN leadership program was really helpful to me, as was the practice development program. I got research positions for nurses and things which hadn't happened before, but it brought me much closer to the lived experience of service users, which led to a couple of projects that I will flick through very shortly. So one was to understand the experience of detained patients, and also to work with service user researchers. And that was a brilliant lesson, again, about data analysis and how you know, we, me, as a nurse academic can see things through a different lens than can a service user researcher. And then that led to the ePsychnurse.net program, EU-funded project. I miss the EU, they're very good to me. And again, that was influencing service users in some of those countries, with the exception of the Republic of Ireland, the RFI. There was no service user involvement at all. So as a result of this project, we got a lot of service user involvement, particularly in Finland, and it's still going now. And that was about how we could impact on the lives of service users with registered nurses using more effective and ethical interventions. And we used virtual patient scenarios, which was a new thing for me. I'd never done that before. But it was all the service user stories, and they worked with us and the software developers to do that. And that's just some of the publications that we got from that. But all of this was leading to something also in my role as the chief nurse at Springfield and the Associated Trust. And it became very clear to me that within a few months of starting that job in 2004, that there was a sort of a lack of understanding between what the trust board wanted to do and what the nurses on the ground understood about the trust board. So I had to find a way of getting them to understand each other. And I also learned very quickly that boards are not interested in anything anecdotal, they're only interested in numbers and traffic lights. So I thought I needed to do something about that. And I started this thing which we fondly called PINS. It was great, but it was unrealistic because it was far too time consuming. It was attempting to achieve lots of things, some of which it did, but it wasn't sustainable. But the principle was right. Because I wanted to make mental health nurses value themselves, and I wanted the people in the trust to value what the nurses did on the ground. And sometimes that value wasn't there. So then that led to the therapeutic engagement questionnaire. So I took the lessons that I had learned from the PINS to start this work, which was funded by Kingston and also by the nursing division of the Department of Health. And Ben Thomas was there, which was really useful. So it was a real partnership with service users and an advisory group, and there's some people like Fiona Noland here that was part of that and steered us through it. And I was really worried, and I'm still worried and getting more worried, that mental health nursing was becoming an endangered species. And I really wanted mental health nurses to value what they did. And there was no metric there to do that, and there's a real story behind that, but I don't have time to tell you that. So we developed the tech, and we used psychometric principles. So we had proper item generation, item reduction, factor analysis. So my experience on the PhD stood me in good stead. And we had a whole batch of mental health service users and nurses that worked with us on that project. So in total, you can see the numbers there. And when I think about it, what I was asking mental health service users to do was incredible. Was I was asking them to complete not only the tech questionnaire, as we fondly call it, but also the house and the star, to be able to validate it and to have authenticity and credibility. And service users did that. There was over 600 of them did that. So again, it's about making the invisible skills visible, which was the title of my Skellern lecture in 2017. And it was an impact case study for the REF. So I will digress for a moment, because the Mental Health Nurse Academics group here, along with 4 other groups, nominated me to be on the REF subpanel 3. So thank you, colleagues, for nominating and supporting me in doing that. It was brilliant. It gave me an opportunity to see what nurses were doing in research terms and what mental health nurses were doing in particular. And I'm nearly finished. Right, those are examples of publications, but one in particular is the bottom one, which we have just had published at the end of last year. And that was about the implementation of the therapeutic engagement questionnaire. And I take my hat off to nursing colleagues in a clinical area, because they worked with us and they did that during the time of COVID. And when they were stretched beyond stretching, and they still did it. So, you know, it's amazing what mental health nurses can do. So also, as part of that, I was developing the Centre for Public Engagement along with Solly Braley, who was a colleague at the faculty, and Dr. Gary Hickey, who was PPI lead, and Holly Elson, who was the administrator. And the whole idea of that was to bring service user activity in the faculty together, but not only in the faculty, but beyond. And then some of the research that we did was adopted by the Collaboration for Leadership in Applied Healthcare, or Health Research and Care. And an example of that was a project that we were invited to do by a local CCG who wanted us to explore how the service user voice was made evident in the commissioning of services in the local locality. And that project was then adopted by the Clarke, which was that. I'm sure most of you will have heard of Sir Graham Thornycroft. Graham led the Clarke, and Graham also leads the ARC, which followed on. So as part of the ARC, I was a member of the Strategic Oversight Patient and Public Involvement Group. And then with the new ARC, I became the PPI Research Theme Lead. And that's a bit of what we do, because it's all about about research getting applied into practice against all the challenges that we face these days. Ambitious, some of it happens as we would like it to, and some of it comes across as challenges. So in conclusion then, I've had an amazing journey. I'm proud to be a mental health nurse. I have met and worked with wonderful people in a variety of contexts. I formed numerous friendships. I revisited and continued to revisit and stayed attached to fond places, the Bethlehem Royal and the Maudsley, hence my hologram on the wall and my position in the museum. I now do voluntary work there, so I like to keep my foot in the door. Working with Kevin at the IOP with an honorary lectureship. Go back to Windsor House. I still work with people in Jordan, but I first went there at the invitation of the British Council in 1987. South Africa the same. A paper that Liana Ace did on concept analysis of therapeutic engagement was one of the things that really got me interested, amongst others, in therapeutic relationships. So I hope I've made a difference a little bit on my journey. And I learned a lot. I'm still learning, but I still have things to do and people to see. So I haven't gone away yet. So some of the things I would like to do, I would like to work and support colleagues who are much younger in years than I am and have got bags of energy and enthusiasm. And I really want to help them make sure that mental health nursing doesn't become extinct, because I have got a terrible feeling that there's something conspiring against us. I'm going to continue as the Applied Research Collaborative PPI Research Theme Lead on to 2026, because we've just got the grant extension to then. I have the book on psychiatric and mental health nursing, Craft of Caring, has to be edited. Thanks people in this room who are contributing to that. I am guest editor of Frontiers in Psychiatry, special issue on cultural considerations in relation to mental health stigma. I've put in a bid to do something on the implementation of the tech. We've been invited to do something on validating the tech for use with children and young people. I'm part of a major project funded by the Norwegian Research Council on resilience and healthcare. And I have a lot of other projects locally. So onwards and upwards, folks. Thanks.
thank you, Mary, that you just made a whole transformational leadership career sound effortless. So well done, it's amazing. I'm just going to invite Professor Ben Hannigan, if he'd like to come up and present Mary with her
I'd be
award.
delighted, Mary. Just before I do, Mary, my good friend, Professor Philip Bernard, who is not able to be here today, sends his very, very warmest wishes to you and to everybody. And you had on your last but one slide, you hope you've made a little difference, Mary. You've made an enormous difference, and it is with very great pleasure that I would like to give you this plaque. A few words from me. We will conclude the evening. I want to thank Mary again. I'd like to thank Anne. Anne is still here. Anne, thank you so much. Thank you both of you for your contributions, for your talks tonight. Trudi, thank you very much for your creativity. Is it true that you are possibly going to become Bard of Carmarthen? It's true. Very many congratulations. This evening happened because an awful lot of people and organisations helped it to be so. I want to thank everybody whose logos you'll see at the bottom here on the slides, who continue to support the Skellern and Lifetime Achievement Award lectures. Big thanks to them. Thanks to Gary. Where is Gary? Here he is. Gary, thank you. Sally, thank you both for keeping alive the Skellern lecture. You're the core of the team, are you not? You are indeed. Seems to me that you are. Dear. And the danger is in saying you're the core of the team, but naming everybody. You're part of the core of the team. Thank you for keeping the lecture series alive. Steve, big thanks to you, and our best wishes to Sue Tranka, CNO. Thank you for your support. Your support has made it possible for this to be live streamed. Thank you, Adam, and colleagues in Drake for live streaming. And thank you very much. And the live streaming has gone through Mental Health TV, so our friend Dave Monday at the back, Mental Health Nurses Association. And we hope that for posterity and for viewing for the hereafter, it will be possible to see the recording of this evening's event on Mental Health TV. Thank you very much. Here in Cardiff University, Dave Whittaker, Head of School for Healthcare Sciences, thank you very much for supporting this event. For people who are members of Mental Health Nurse Academics UK, we'll be back here in this very room tomorrow, minus the wine, but there we go. Colleagues in our marketing team, Ellie, helped us an awful lot. Colleague Teddy in the university's conference and events team, hospitality and building people, they looked after us very well. Thank you very, very much. Seren, thank you very much. Where is Stephen? Thank you very, very much for immense support in making this possible. Planning for the minutiae. Nick, thank you for chairing. And for people who presented, for people who gave plaques, for people who came here, for people who have listened online and will listen to the recording in the future, thank you. There's one other thing I need to say, and Gary will be looking at me thinking, is he going to forget? No, I won't. So, okay, it's Sally, isn't it? The nominations are open, am I right, for the Eileen Skellern Lecture 2024 and the Lifetime Achievement Award 2024. And Sally Hardy, you are the person to contact? Send nominations to Sally Hardy.
Myself or Gary will work it out between us, absolutely.
Catherine. The three of you who are the beating heart of the, yes, okay. And, okay, so nominations for Lifetime Achievement Award, nominations for Skellern Lecture, and expressions of interest to host the event in 2024.
Yes. I mean, they've got a lot to live up to, Ben, haven't they?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Very best. And I might go to the pub afterwards. If anybody's in the room.